David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So as we were going into production for yesterday's show, Robert Mueller spoke. Robert Mueller issued a statement. He spoke publicly for the first time since the publication of the Mueller Report. And it very quickly became a breaking and major story in and of itself, but also because of the reactions that it triggered from President Donald Trump himself, from Fox News anchor Brett Baier, all of which we'll get to a little bit later. But the bottom line is that it was announced yesterday that Robert Mueller would be issuing a statement, special prosecutor. He indeed did issue that statement. He spoke publicly and he confirmed that he could not clear and has not cleared President Donald Trump of criminal wrongdoing, period. Now, a lot of my audience, hopefully, read the Mueller Report. And if you read the Mueller Report, nothing that Robert Mueller said yesterday would come as a surprise. To those who were operating on the basis of what the Barr letter said, for example, anyone who fell for no collusion, no obstruction, if you bought into that narrative, then when Robert Mueller yesterday said, if we could have cleared Trump, we would have cleared Trump, meaning we didn't clear Trump because we couldn't clear Trump, that may have actually been newsworthy to you. Robert Mueller saying, if we had confidence the president did not commit a crime, we would have said so. The reason the report doesn't clear Trump of obstruction of justice is because Robert Mueller could not clear Trump of obstruction of justice. And then again, Robert Mueller pointing out that the Justice Department won't charge Trump, but that there are other options, again, referring to impeachment. And many Democrats, as a result of Robert Mueller's statement yesterday, saying now it is time to start that impeachment debate on the floor of the House. But we will get to that. A little context for what Robert Mueller said.
When a subject of an investigation obstructs that investigation or lies to investigators, it strikes at the core of their government's effort to find the truth and hold wrongdoers accountable. Let me say a word about the report. The report has two parts, addressing the two main issues we were asked to investigate. The first volume of the report details numerous efforts emanating from Russia to influence the election. This volume includes a discussion of the Trump campaign's response to this activity, as well as our conclusion that there was insufficient evidence to charge a broader conspiracy. And in the second volume, the report describes the results and analysis of our obstruction of justice investigation involving the president. The order appointing me special counsel authorized us to investigate actions that could obstruct the investigation. And we conducted that investigation, and we kept the office of the acting attorney general apprised of the progress of our work. And as set forth in the report, after that investigation, if we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so.
Mueller also announced that he's resigning his position as special prosecutor, retiring from the Justice Department, sort of very formally ending his role as special prosecutor. So on the one hand, major breaking news, special counsel saying, I can't clear Trump. On the other hand, nothing surprising at all if you read the Mueller report, if instead of listening to the William Barr or to Trump or Trump's kids or Fox News or Sean Hannity, you would know already that the president was not cleared of obstruction by Mueller's investigation. Bottom line, in all likelihood, Donald Trump committed the crime, multiple counts of obstruction of justice. Robert Mueller did not indict for political reasons, for technical reasons, pointing out that the Justice Department has this policy of not indicting sitting presidents, but pointing out again that there are other remedies available. And there are some who are interpreting this as a signal from Robert Mueller to Nancy Pelosi, to whoever that might be in a position to actually deal with impeachment seriously, that is the only path forward if you want to hold Trump accountable for what appears to be obstruction on, from my recollection of the Mueller report, 8 of 14 possible obstructive acts, I believe is how they were referred to in the Mueller report. So on impeachment, there's some momentum here. There is a public statement from Robert Mueller. People are going to prison. Let's move forward. And I have been saying for a while now that there are numerous strategic benefits for Democrats to starting impeachment debate on the floor of the House. I do not believe that you're going to remove Trump, but I am going to outline later on in the program what the advantages to doing this would be. And I think they are clear. I know that there is a contingent of the left which says, you know, it could backfire if Democrats start impeachment proceedings on the floor of the House. It could reinvigorate Trump's base. It could be a distraction from 2020 Democratic candidates talking about ideas and policy. I don't believe that. And I'm going to outline that for you a little bit later on in the program. Start the impeachment debate, get things going, get testimony from witnesses, expose the content of the Mueller report to the American people, which, as I told you yesterday and the day before that, most Americans have not read the Mueller report. Most Americans don't understand what is in the Mueller report. And it would be extremely beneficial to get that out in front of as many Americans as possible. And by the way, side note, Mueller in his statement also did again say Russia was working through WikiLeaks for the publication of a lot of the stuff that ultimately was published that was illegally obtained by Russia. That is something that people on the right and left were denying for years, which Mueller has now repeated and provided evidence for in his report. Not a peep from all the people who said there's no way WikiLeaks would ever be involved in anything like that. Well, they were. Okay, either on purpose or accidentally, Donald Trump has admitted publicly for the first time that I'm aware of that Russia helped to get him elected. Donald Trump admitted this in a series of tweets this morning, responding to yesterday's Robert Mueller statement about the investigation. And I want your help figuring this out because I genuinely don't know whether Donald Trump realizes that he admitted to Russia helping to get him elected. Let's take a look at the tweets and go right to the source. Trump tweeting this morning, Russia, Russia, Russia. That's all you heard at the beginning of this witch hunt hoax. And now Russia has disappeared because I had nothing to do with Russia helping me to get elected. It was a crime that didn't exist. And then Donald Trump going on to say, so now the Dems and their partner, the fake news media, say he fought back against this phony crime that didn't exist, this horrendous false accusation, et cetera, et cetera. But again, Donald Trump is denying not that Russia helped him to win, but that he had anything to do with Russia helping him to win. This is finally an admission that Russia helped Trump, which Trump had heretofore not admitted to. And in fact, Trump denied it countless times. Trump denied that Russia helped. Trump denied that Russia preferred him over Hillary. And yet here he is admitting to it as a foregone conclusion, not even arguing that Russia didn't help him to win, simply saying he wasn't involved with it. He didn't have anything to do with it. Trump previously said Russian interference, if it existed, had no effect on the election results. Trump previously said at other times there was no interference. And then, of course, after Donald Trump says, I had nothing to do with Russia helping me to get elected, he later backtracked. Less than an hour later, he was walking out to his helicopter, I believe at the White House, and he was asked about those tweets. Mr. President, you seem to have admitted that Russia did help you get elected, but you had nothing to do with it. And then he backtracked and said, no, Russia didn't actually help me to get elected. Another 180-degree flip on the tweet from an hour earlier, which in and of itself was a 180-degree turnaround from his previous statements that Russia didn't actually play a role in helping to get him elected. So before, we didn't have Trump on record admitting that Russia helped get him elected. Before Donald Trump tweeted that he had nothing to do with Russia helping to get him elected, we only had the Paul Manafort stuff and the Jeff Sessions Russia lies and the Michael Flynn Russia fiasco and the Russian oligarch stuff and the money laundering for Russians thing and the Trump Tower meeting thing and the spilling of secrets from Israel to a Russian spy recruiter in the Oval Office thing and the Russia giving stuff to WikiLeaks to publish and help Trump thing and the Russia, if you're listening, get those emails, and then Russia does actually go and hack and get Hillary's emails. We only had all of that stuff and dozens of other things before Donald Trump's tweets, but now we actually have a tweet from Donald Trump admitting that Russia helped to get him elected, but he didn't have anything to do with it. One other tweet I want to mention. Right before Donald Trump sent these tweets, he sent another one just riddled with lies. Take a look at this. Donald Trump tweeting, "The greatest presidential harassment in history after spending $40 million over 2 years, 2 dark years." Remember that the probe ended up making money because of all the money it recovered from criminals. "With unlimited access, people, resources, and cooperation," which is, of course, wrong. Donald Trump did everything possible to avoid sitting down with Robert Mueller and ended up providing completely bogus and meaningless answers in writing. "Highly conflicted Robert Mueller would have brought charges." Of course, no evidence of Mueller being conflicted. "If he had anything, but there were no charges to bring." And of course, Robert Mueller says he cannot clear Donald Trump of obstruction of justice and explains the political reasons which led to him not charging Donald Trump. I still think it's important to get all of this stuff on the record, right? Trump now has admitted in a tweet that Russia helped him to get elected. Anytime from now going forward that this is called into question, let's just remember Trump has admitted it. And this will actually, even though it's very obvious to anybody who's been observing this for the last 2 years, getting it on record and having it to refer to may allow us to short circuit some pointless and circular, endless arguments that the right and defenders of Trump or deniers of reality may try to push. So I get it. Trump backtracked within an hour. Someone, I'm sure, explained to him that the wording implicitly suggests or says or confirms that, yes, Russia helped, but Trump didn't have anything to do with it. I get that he backtracked on it an hour later in front of his helicopter. It's still useful to get this stuff on record as we build our case and expand the way in which we can discuss this going forward. So major, major admission from Donald Trump. Unclear if he even realizes he admitted it. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Did Donald Trump understand when he put together that tweet that he was admitting that Russia helped, but denying he had anything to do with it? Or did he not even understand that that's what he was doing? Let me know what you think.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, let me say thanks to 2 new David Pakman Show members who recently signed up at www.joinpakman.com. Membership, of course, the #1 funding source for the show. Really great people who can afford it are supporting the show financially, just a couple bucks a month with the coupon code This Is 2020. Joshua Detweiler is today's first new member of the day. And Nathan Hamslich is today's second new member of the day. Now, if you have been watching or listening for the last few years, you might know normally I thank 1 new member of the day. We thankfully have had such significant growth in membership support that we are insanely behind on new membership thank yous. So I'm going to start doubling up and thanking 2 people. Today, those people are Joshua and Nathan. And I don't want to forget that we also have people who have been supporters for a while. In David Lynn's case, he's been a supporter for almost 5 years, and he's today's longtime sustaining member of the day. Joshua, Nathan, and David, very male-oriented member shout-outs today. Thanks to all of you. Join them at www.joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%. If you want the discount, if you need the discount, take the discount. Coupon code This Is 2020. Okay, we have a David Pakman Show subreddit, which is one of the bigger subreddits of progressive independent shows. Now more than 10,350 David Pakman Show viewers and listeners who are subscribed to the David Pakman Show subreddit. I told a story on the Tuesday bonus show, my first day back from my trip, which included a visit to France and a visit to Italy. I told a story of using my Spanish fluency to try to communicate with an Italian taxi driver. And this story is like nothing that we've had in probably years on the David Pakman Show bonus show in terms of the reaction that it has triggered from so many people in our audience. And a very, very funny meme was posted to the subreddit, which says it's a guy pouring Coke into a Pepsi can with the headline, "Trying to modify my Spanish vocabulary to speak Italian, hoping no one will notice." Well, listen, people noticed. When I used the word fijo, which means fixed, which of course is not a sound, that J sound is not a sound that even exists in Italian, to try to discuss with the taxi driver whether it was a fixed price trip or not. He noticed. It was not fooling anybody. But check out the Tuesday bonus show, sign up on our website, check out that story and let me know what you think. People titillated, disgraced, ashamed, and horrified by that story from the Tuesday bonus show. Also from the David Pakman Show subreddit, a baseball team, I didn't get to cover this story, but it is a funny story and interesting. A baseball team has apologized after including Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in a sort of compilation of enemies of freedom alongside North Korean dictator Kim Jong-Un. It's a unusual and bizarre story, which I encourage you to read, although I didn't have time to get to it on the regular show today. And then also from the David Pakman Show subreddit, an article from NPR pointing out that the Democratic presidential field will look a lot smaller by September. And this is something I'm actually going to dig into in some significant detail next. I'm going to talk about the new requirements from the DNC to continue qualifying for debates. And I'll talk about whether these are too strict, not strict enough, oppressive, pro-establishment, anti-progressive, whatever. But I'm glad that people on the subreddit are following that story because it is an important one. Join the discussion. We have numerous moderators on the David Pakman Show subreddit. I like to keep the conversation polite, constructive, non-trolling, and the moderators are doing a really great job of managing the community, which now has more than 10,000 of our viewers and listeners regularly participating. Go to davidpakman.com/REDDIT, hit the subscribe button, on to 15,000. It would be great to get 15,000 subscribers to the David Pakman Show subreddit. Okay, let's dig into these new DNC debate requirements. The Democratic Party has put in place some new and stricter requirements to make the third and fourth officially DNC-sanctioned primary debates, which are scheduled to take place in, we'll put it up on the screen in a second, but I believe it's September and October is when debates 3 and 4 will take place. And there's a lot to talk about here. And I want to sort of do this justice and really go through it piece by piece and think it through, because a lot of the reactions I've seen online to these requirements are not making a lot of sense. So first, let's zoom out a little bit. Why do we have requirements? Why do we have minimum standards that need to be met to participate in debates? Well, if you have no standards at all, you can end up with dozens, 50. I mean, you've got to have some. Does anyone who announces a candidacy get to participate in DNC-sanctioned debates? Does anybody who's on the ballot in even one state get to participate? It's chaos if you have no minimum requirements whatsoever. But on the other side of this, we know, 2016 being a prime example, that the DNC has ways of influencing the Democratic primary that can be anti-progressive, anti-insurgent candidate, and basically pro-status quo, pro-establishment candidate. And so what we don't want to have are requirements that are so strict that they preempt the possibility of having serious insurgent progressive candidates and challengers for the 2020 Democratic primary. So the first debates are in late June and late July. We're very close. I mean, we're a month from the first debate. And the requirements for those first two debates, which are going to be split into A and B because the field is still so large. The requirement for those first two debates, which will be debate 1A and 1B and debate 2A and 2B. We've known about these for a while. 65,000 individual donors, and you need to be polling 1% in 3 qualified polls closer to the date of the debate. So the poll, we'll look at the polls now to figure out who would be in as of today. But what's going to matter is how the candidates are doing closer to the debates in mid to late June. So we'll put up on the screen for you also the requirements for the following debates. So first two debates, 65K donors and 1% in 3 qualified polls. The DNC has now added stricter requirements for debates 3 and 4. And in debates 3 and 4, the requirements double the donor number to 130,000 donors. And they also double the polling requirement to 2% instead of 1%. And that needs to be in 4 rather than just 3 polls. So the criticisms immediately from some people have been, this is going to destroy the field. This is unfair to smaller candidates. This is a pro-establishment DNC move. This is potentially going to alienate donors to those lower-ranked candidates because they will say, well, why am I even going to bother if these new, even higher requirements are going to keep them out of the 3rd and 4th debate? Anyway, we want the field to stay bigger for a longer period of time. I think we have to break this down into 2 parts, the donor requirement and the polling requirement, okay? Let's first talk about the 2% polling requirement. The DNC, the convention it's in the summer. I don't know if it's scheduled for June, July, or August, but it's in summer of 2020. If you don't have 2% by the 3rd debate in September, I believe it is completely reasonable to say you can't continue being in the officially sanctioned DNC debates. If you can't get to 2% after 2 national debates and 6 or 7 months of campaigning for most of these candidates, you don't have a shot, and you are becoming a distraction, period, and you're taking time away from the candidates who are in this thing, having time to better flesh out and talk about their ideas. I have no problem whatsoever with a 2% polling requirement for the 3rd and 4th debates. The question mark for me is 130,000 donors, okay? Bill Scher pointed out on Twitter that back in 2008, John Edwards had like 20,000 donors or something like that at a relatively advanced point in the campaign. He was a serious candidate in terms of the polling, but he did not have 130,000 donors. So I think that it's really important to point out that if we want to make a case that these requirements are too strict, it's got to be along the number of donors line. I don't think there is any serious case to be made that 2% by September is too high of a threshold. Now, let's understand a little bit about what the effect would be of the 1% and 2% polling requirements based on today's numbers, okay? To be in the first debates, you need to poll 1%. If we look at the current average polling, remember, what matters is how they poll right before the debates, not right now. But let's imagine that we had today's polling as the sort of way to decide who gets into the debates. You have Bennett, Bullock, Hickenlooper, Seth Moulton, Bill de Blasio, Delaney, Kirsten Gillibrand, Marianne Williamson, Tim Ryan, and Tulsi Gabbard. That's 10 candidates. None of them are polling 1% right now, okay? There are, there are 10 candidates who are polling 1% right now, and that's still a very solid number for the first and second debate. There's a broad range of opinion represented among those 10 candidates. So there would be a bunch of people who would be out today if the requirement were 1%, but we would still have 10 people participating, very reasonable for this early in the game. If the 2% requirement were put in place today, you would still have Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Beto O'Rourke, and Cory Booker. That's 7 candidates, okay? If we have 7 candidates by the third debate, it is very reasonable. And again, if you participate in 2 national debates and you can't get 2%, I don't believe you deserve to keep taking up space on the stage. You don't have a shot. So the only debate for me is about the individual donor number. I get that donations are a way to prove your viability, but 130,000 donors at 14 months before the election, which is effectively what September will be, that might be too high, okay? Can somebody polling 1.8% in October end up being the nominee by June? I don't think they can. Can someone with only 100,000 donors in October end up being the nominee in June? I think they can. I mean, it may be a long shot compared to some of the other candidates, but that's where the focus should be on getting these requirements changed. 1% to be in debates 1 and 2, 2% to be in debates 3 and 4, completely reasonable. And I have not seen any serious argument that is too high of a requirement. If you think I'm wrong, let me know. We will have a poll on the David Pakman Show Instagram page about this, at David Pakman Show. Check that out. Follow the David Pakman Show on Instagram. And while you're there, follow me on Instagram at david.pakman as well.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome to the program today Tom Wheeler, who is the former chairman of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. Thanks so much for talking to me today.
David, great to be with you.
So, I mean, to begin with, I think if we want to have a conversation about what regulation of tech companies should look like, it's important to understand how we sort of got to where we are. So maybe to start with, how have tech companies relatively successfully avoided the type of regulation that some believe should be in place?
Well, David, it's interesting. I have a new book out called From Gutenberg to Google, The History of Our Future. And one of the things that it talks about is how every time a new technology comes along, it's the innovators that make the rules. And that's the situation that we're in now. It was the same story, whether it was the pioneers who were pioneering the West or Rockefeller and Carnegie. Because they see the vision, they make the rules, and they make the rules until such time as those decisions begin to impact on the rights of others and the public interest. And I think that's where we are today. And so it's time for us, the people, through our elected representatives, to take back the rulemaking and to decide what are the rules that are in the public interest, not just the interests of the pioneers.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I agree with you. I don't think it'll come as a shock to my audience that I do. But the issue that we've had historically, particularly in the last couple of decades, is that because the desires of large corporations and the wealthy are much more likely to be made into what becomes the regulatory environment, what makes the priorities of the House and Senate and is turned into bills, what is it that the average person can actually do to make sure that what's in the public's best interest is done? I mean, look at the net neutrality situation, right? Millions and millions of comments, the FCC website going down, et cetera, et cetera. You know the story. My audience knows the story. And we got a repeal of net neutrality as an example. So can what's in the public interest really be successfully lobbied for by the public?
Well, yes. And the reality there is, if you don't, who will? Okay, so I mean, you can say, "Oh my goodness, I'm just an individual. I don't count." Well, then you might as well turn it over to the folks who are running the big companies. And I wouldn't say, by the way, that the net neutrality fight is over.
No, it's not.
We're in court right now, challenging the ridiculousness of the Trump FCC's repeal of the rules. And I think I'm cautiously optimistic about that. And then the House of Representatives passed a piece of legislation that reinstates the rules. So that's very much in play. And what we can't fall prey to is a demand that everything has to happen quickly. This is a long game.
There's no question it's a long game. And one of the players that wants to have a say in that game in terms of the regulation is the tech companies themselves. And we've seen more and more companies say, oh, we are for, I mean, we saw Zuckerberg say it in testimony under oath and others, I believe regulation is a good thing, and I want to work with our elected officials to get the regulation in place. Is this something that we should have any? Do you believe that this is a good faith offer that tech companies are making to participate in figuring out what the regulation should be, or is it just the fox guarding the hen house?
Well, I don't think it's bad faith, but I think that it is a situation of where you stand depends on where you sit. And, when I was chairman of the FCC, people would always come in and say, oh, let me tell you why what is in my interest is in the public interest.
Right.
And they would define things very narrowly. And what we're seeing right now are the tech companies saying, okay, for instance, I'm for net neutrality, but I'm for that definition of net neutrality being an empty bag, if you will.
When it comes to the reality that many of these platforms are both social network content providers and they are also massive ad brokerage platforms, do you believe that those two sides of many of these entities need to be separated, either via antitrust or some other means?
Well, of course, that's the kind of issue that Elizabeth Warren and others have been making, and I've got a lot of respect for that. I have some concern that you got to love it when your cell phone goes off in the middle of this.
Someone does not want you to tell me what your view is on the antitrust issue very
exactly.
clearly.
But we've solved that problem. But you got to look at antitrust as really three prongs.
Yes.
I mean, the first prong is to break up the companies. The difficulty there is it's a long prong. It was 10 years between the filing of the suit to break up AT&T and the actual breakup of AT&T. And so that's a serious challenge. And we also have a problem that our Supreme Court right now holds to the Chicago school theory that makes it very difficult to establish harm. The second prong of antitrust enforcement is regulatory. And that's what I tried to do at the FCC, and to take competitive principles and put them into regulation. And the third prong is this concept of openness that you and I were just talking about. And so I think it would be an interesting concept if, rather than just talking about separating the social platform from the ad sales activity, we go right to the heart of what is it that creates the market dominance in both of those areas, and that's their data. And if we're talking about our networks being open, then we probably ought to be talking about the services that use our networks, and in so doing capture our personal information, then making that information also interconnectable, just like the networks are.
So I mean, just to be clear, is that an issue of privacy regulation? Is that an issue of data ownership?
No, I think it's an issue of two things. It goes back to the old common law concept of the duty to deal. You can't hoard information any more than the guy who was running the ferry across the river could tell somebody that he couldn't ride on the ferry. And then there's also a duty of care, which is, okay, I've got your information. I've got a fiduciary responsibility to you as to how I'm going to deal with that information. And we need to go at both of those. And if you deal with that, then you're dealing with the core issue that creates this monopoly power elsewhere.
So in the European Union, there is now the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and it does a lot of different things. One of the issues is it goes to the sort of like the financial risk to internet companies for improperly sharing user data. It imposes large fines, hypothetically. Do you like that framework? Does it not go far enough, maybe? Does it go too far?
No, I thought GDPR was a great first step. I'm not sure it can be imported wholesale into the United States because of some of our laws and traditions, but it established the principle that there was a responsibility to the party that was collecting the data. But let me use another European example that kind of supports the openness principle I was just talking about, and that is that in the UK, the government has required that the 9 largest banks open up or make open access available with consumer permission the data that they hold on consumers so that third parties can offer innovative new services to those consumers. The services wouldn't be available previously because they didn't have access to the data. And the companies, the banks, were hoarding that data and say, well, you can only buy our services. And now they were forced to open it up. And there are 200 different service providers that have sprung up saying, hey, I've got a competitive way of, or a competitive alternative for consumers to consider. I think we can bring that kind of attitude to the United States.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because that's a very market-ish sort of solution, which is not to say we need to make it so that the data is not being shared in the first place, or it's not dealing so much with what some see as the problem of this data being a marketable commodity, but it's saying, let's level the playing field in letting that data hypothetically at least be used to create other things of value. So it's, I'm not making a value judgment necessarily, but it's certainly a solution that says we want more sort of free market possibilities rather than a consumer protection angle. Is that, am I interpreting that correctly or not?
It goes back to the concept, David, of openness and interconnection. I mean, the concept behind net neutrality was open networks. Now let's talk about how we have open data that has been collected through the use of those networks, and we make that data available to spur competition.
To talk a little bit about the next 4 to 8 years, or the next political cycle, so to speak, and what it will happen in terms of both net neutrality and also tech regulation that we're talking about. What are the elements of government that are going to most determine the path forward? Is it as simple as if Trump gets reelected, not much will change at the FCC? If a Democrat wins, things will change? Is it elsewhere we should be looking?
Well, I think you can make that kind of a simple comparison. I mean, you look at what the Trump administration has done thus far. It has been to tear everything down. I mean, what has the Trump FCC done? They've gone through and systematically eliminated whatever they can. But there's an interesting thing that's happening as a result of that, David. And that is that the tech companies have perhaps been too successful. They have convinced the federal government, particularly the Trump administration, to totally leave them alone. And in that kind of a void, they invite others, whether it is states like California stepping in to pass laws on privacy and net neutrality, 36 other states that have stepped up to do something about net neutrality, or countries. You mentioned GDPR a minute ago, and other things that are happening in the EU. And all of a sudden, the companies are waking up and saying, oh my golly, wait a minute. We don't have anybody establishing a common set of rules. And so we've got 36 different states doing things with net neutrality. Golly, I'd feel a lot better if there was only one rule. And so the fact that they did everything possible to kill meaningful net neutrality at the federal level has opened them up at the state level. The fact that they have done everything possible to kill meaningful privacy regulation. I mean, we put the first network privacy requirements in place when I was at the FCC, and 67 days after the Trump administration came into office, the Republican Congress repealed them. And now all at the request of the companies. And now the companies are seeing California and other states and countries pop up with their own set of rules. And they're saying, oh my golly, I can't have all these different rules out there. I got to have one set of rules. And so it may be, there's a great Oscar Wilde quote. He said that there are two great tragedies in life: not getting what you want and getting it. And the reality here is the tech companies just may have been so massively successful that they have forced themselves to embrace federal regulation that heretofore they had always been opposing.
We will, of course, continue to follow it. It could go a number of different ways, as you are outlining. We've been speaking with former chairman of the FCC, Tom Wheeler. I will mention his book, which was published February 26th, From Gutenberg to Google, The History of Our Future. Such a pleasure having you on.
Thanks, David. I enjoyed it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So we have yet another sitting senator calling for the impeachment of President Donald Trump. And it's Cory Booker. Cory Booker is adding his name to the list. Cory Booker, of course, is also running for president. He's polling around 2%, as I showed you earlier on in the show. And this is not necessarily, once again, a call for the Senate to remove Donald Trump. It's a call for the start of proceedings in the House. Cory Booker tweeting, "This administration has continued to stonewall Congress's oversight. Beginning impeachment proceedings is the only path forward." So we now have 3 sitting senators, all Democrats, calling for impeachment proceedings. We've got Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, and Cory Booker. Interestingly, all 3 of them are running for president. We have any number of Democratic members of the House who have already said so, including Elijah Cummings and many others. And then we also have, as I told you yesterday, Republican Congressman Justin Amash, who says it is time to start impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump. Now, on the other hand of this, you have still Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, who says we should not move forward on impeachment and that it would be either a distraction, Trump's not worth it, or whatever else is the latest argument that she has made. Here's my bottom line on this. You're not going to successfully remove Trump from the White House sooner than you could just vote him out via an impeachment proceeding, period, right? I mean, Republicans are not going to come to the side of impeachment. You're not going to get between now and January of 2021 impeachment debate, impeachment of articles, a full trial and conviction by the Senate, and the removal of the president of the United States. You're just not going to, okay? So the strategy needs to be calculated or evaluated, knowing that the impeachment process itself is not going to be what removes Donald Trump. So the reasons not to go down the impeachment path, at least with starting debate in the House, are, as we've heard before, it might reinvigorate Donald Trump's base. If Democrats push this, it could really fire up Trump's base. I don't think that's a very good argument. Trump's base is already voting for him. They are effectively unreachable by reason, okay? Number 2, it could distract from the agenda and the platforms of the 2020 Democratic candidates. And in doing so, it could inadvertently help Donald Trump get reelected in 2020. I don't believe that that's a reasonable concern either, because we are talking about members of the House of Representatives starting debate, bringing in witnesses, getting testimony on the record. Meanwhile, the 2020 Democratic candidates can keep just talking about policy and issues. Debates start next month, and there's another debate in July. So I don't think that that is a concern. And what you have to understand, I know I've been saying this a lot, most Americans don't know what's in the Mueller report. Okay. Mueller's statement yesterday was essentially Mueller begging people, read the damn report. Even though Donald Trump's base could get more fired up by the impeachment debate starting in the House, they're already voting for Trump. Who cares if they're more fired up? The impeachment debate could put the content of the Mueller report front and center, and there is way more of a chance of reaching people who have no idea what's in the report, or people who fell for the Barr letter hook, line, and sinker, and fell for no collusion, no obstruction, hook, line, and sinker. And it might get them to realize that, wait a second, Mueller says substantial evidence of obstruction. That could damage Trump's chances of re-election in 2020. And there are two different ways that the impeachment debate could damage Trump without actually being what removes him. So again, impeachment is not going to remove Trump sooner than he could be voted out. We're very close to the election at this point, and Republicans show no signs that they would actually remove Trump no matter what he did, Republicans in the Senate. The first way that the impeachment debate could damage Trump is that it will simply distract from Trump's campaign, right? Media is going to cover. We have to, for all the bad things that corporate media does, we can think about how we can use corporate media to our advantage, and having the impeachment debate on the floor of the House will get media coverage. Any media coverage of impeachment debate is time that is not being spent on the case that Donald Trump is going to be making for his own reelection. That's a very good thing for whoever ultimately is the nominee in 2020. And number two, the fact that there is this cloud of impeachment debate over Donald Trump in and of itself could simply be damaging to Donald Trump in how it influences less engaged voters to vote, how it influences moderate voters or independents or whoever else. The information itself, right? If only a few % of the country has read the report, impeachment proceedings that push the content public could damage Donald Trump's reelection chances as well. So I think that this is something Democrats should do right away. I've seen the right wingers who say you're going to help Trump if you do anything related to impeachment, because you're going to make 2020 about impeachment instead of about issues. That's not true. Let the House have their proceedings. Let the House bring testimony. The candidates can keep campaigning on issues and ideas, period. These are two different things. It's not even we can walk and chew gum at the same time. It's one person can be doing the chewing of the gum. The other person is doing the walking. We're talking about the House of Representatives as compared to the 2020 Democratic candidates. That's not a concern. They should do it right away. The list of people who continue to insist that Robert Mueller's report can be accurately summarized as no collusion, no obstruction is getting smaller and smaller, even though Trump's hardcore base still believes it. And even Fox News host Bret Baier, who just a few weeks ago tried to tag team Bernie Sanders during that Fox News town hall, along with the other moderator, Martha McCallum, even that Bret Baier now admits when Mueller spoke yesterday, he didn't say no collusion, no obstruction. Now, this is small. It's a small win. But every time somebody on the right-wing echo chambers list of characters tells an even uncontroversial truth about the Mueller probe, it's a good thing. It's another attempt to pierce that echo chamber in which a lot of these right-wingers are living. Bret Baier yesterday, right after Robert Mueller gave his statement, during which he said, if we could have cleared Trump, we would have cleared Trump, but we didn't. Bret Baier appeared on Fox News to provide analysis, as they call it. And he said, this is much more than no collusion, no obstruction. Check it out.
Bret Baier, standing by, anchor of Special Report. Bret, your takeaway from all that, Robert Mueller resigning and returning to private life, and he said a lot there.
He did. He also said he is not planning on testifying, and Bill's right. There could be a subpoena that compels him to, but he's making the choice not to. I was struck by the tone and tenor of those remarks as he laid out his case, wrapping up this report. This was not, as the president says time and time again, no collusion, no obstruction. It was much more nuanced than that. He said specifically they couldn't find evidence sufficient to move forward with a crime on the issue of conspiracy, on the collusion part of the investigation of the Trump campaign. He said specifically if they had found that the president did not commit a crime on obstruction, they would have said that, and then went into specific details.
So you might react to this by saying, who cares what Fox News clown Bret Baier says? Well, the reason we care is because the Fox News crowd is significantly clueless about this reality. It matters that Bret Baier says this is not no collusion, no obstruction, because a lot of the core Fox News audience has been living under the belief of no collusion, no obstruction ever since the Barr letter came out and Donald Trump went on a nationwide no collusion, no obstruction victory tour. They are watching Fox News not because it informs them, but because it makes them feel good, because it sort of confirms their preconceived notions. It confirms what they want to be true, which makes them feel good. And it actually goes even further because for some people, Fox News confirms their biases. For other people, people who are even less informed, Fox News is actually setting the biases, which works, and it even works on Trump. Fox News sometimes sets Trump's position and point of view on different issues. And that's why it matters that Bret Baier says this. And what you have to understand about Fox is that it is a business that makes money from right-wing news and commentary. If Donald Trump ultimately turns on Fox News, or if Fox News believes that it's just no longer profitable to be the Trump channel, they'll stop. I mean, they'll still be right-wing, but they can separate from Trump at any time. There are many shades of right-wing propaganda. There can be conservative propaganda. There's statist, authoritarian propaganda, which is sort of de facto right-wing. There's Trumpian propaganda. Of course, there's anti-Democratic Party propaganda. Not all right-wing propaganda assumes this sort of endless, unwavering support of Donald Trump. I don't actually expect a change anytime soon. But the point is, Fox News' propaganda is carefully calculated for profit. And what's profitable for them could change over time. And if it does, they will abandon Donald Trump. They won't abandon the right wing, but they will abandon Donald Trump. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Very strange topic for today's voicemail. Take a listen to this.
Hey, David. I wanted to talk about some articles that I've seen recently about Pete Buttigieg and some pockets of the left that are apparently accusing him of not being gay enough, which I find to be slightly unnerving. And in a Democratic field that has more diversity than I think I've ever seen in my lifetime, where we have an Asian man, a Jewish man, women of color, everything that you can imagine, why are we still seeing these sorts of attacks? And they're not in the mainstream so far as I can tell, but certainly areas and enclaves of the left that sort of want to keep pushing a very specific and focused kind of diversity and identity politics.
Yeah, listen, I have not seen this. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I've not seen anyone say Pete Buttigieg is not gay enough. I mean, what? I don't even understand how that qualifies as an argument. If someone is saying that, I want to hear about it because it's so ridiculous at its face. But again, I think it's really important, even if it exists anecdotally, we shouldn't, on the left, get pulled into going completely out of our way to refute ideas that are barely relevant. And this is where a lot of the, sometimes I'll appear on other shows and I'll get asked about identity politics on the left. I'll get asked about, free speech, limiting leftists on college campuses or whatever. And I've been very critical of those things, but I think that we need to be critical of them in proportion to how serious of an issue it is. This thing of Pete Buttigieg isn't gay enough, if it's real, which I haven't even heard, it's not, as the caller says, part of the mainstream discussion about Pete Buttigieg. And so our engagement with these bad ideas and niche ideas that are barely out there, dumb ideas, needs to be minimal because there's no point in getting overly involved in refuting ideas that very few people hold and that are barely relevant within the political discussion. That's been my view. Call stuff out that doesn't make sense when there's an opportunity, when you see it. But the last thing I'm going to do is start going around trying to figure out who's saying Buttigieg isn't gay enough to then focus on criticizing it. There's much bigger ideas to talk about and way bigger fish to fry. We've got a great bonus show for you today. We'll talk about the White House asking the Navy to hide a warship named after late Senator John McCain and much more. Get instant access to the bonus show by becoming a member at joinpakman.com. I'll speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.